In the dusty archives of the Palace Theatre in London sits a photograph that has been locked away from public view for over a century. It shows the final performance of Shakespeare's Hamlet on November 15, 1915. During the height of World War I, the image captures the moment when the ghost of Hamlet's father appears to deliver his haunting monologue about murder and revenge. The actor playing the ghost stands center stage, draped in ethereal white robes, his arms outstretched in dramatic fashion as he addresses the young Prince of Denmark. But when theater historians finally examined this photograph with modern enhancement technology in 2019, they made a discovery so chilling that it challenged everything they thought they knew about death, performance, and the thin boundary between reality and illusion. The actor playing the ghost was Edmund Blackwood, one of London's most celebrated Shakespearean performers. He delivered a performance that night that witnesses described as transcendent, otherworldly, and the most haunting portrayal of supernatural anguish ever witnessed on the English stage. Here's the problem. Edmund Blackwood had died 3 weeks before this performance took place. The theatre world of 1915. London was a close-knit community where everyone knew everyone else's business. Edmund Blackwood's death from consumption on October 23, 1915, had been front-page news in every theatrical publication in Britain. His funeral at St. Paul's Church in Covent Garden had been attended by over 500 people, including some of the most famous actors and playwrights of the era. His grave in Highgate Cemetery had become a pilgrimage site for theatre lovers, who came to pay their respects to one of the greatest classical actors of his generation. So when the curtain rose on November 15th, and Edmund Blackwood walked onto the Palace Theatre stage to deliver the ghost's monologue, the implications were staggering. Either London's entire theatrical community had been catastrophically mistaken about his death, or something genuinely supernatural was occurring on one of the city's most prestigious stages. Edmund Blackwood had been born into the theatre. His father, Harold Blackwood, was a prominent actor-manager who ran his own touring company throughout the English provinces. His mother, Catherine, was a former leading lady who had retired from the stage to raise her family. From the moment he could walk, Edmund was surrounded by the sounds and sights of theatrical life. By age 5, he was appearing as a cherub or page boy in his father's productions. By 10, he was playing small speaking roles, with a natural ability that astonished seasoned professionals. His formal training came at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, where he distinguished himself as the most promising classical actor of his generation. His professors noted not only his technical skill and commanding stage presence, but also an unusual emotional intensity that seemed to come from someplace deeper than mere technique. Fellow students described him as someone who didn't just act his roles but seemed to become inhabited by the characters he portrayed. His professional debut came in 1892, at age 19, playing Laertes in Hamlet at the Lyceum Theatre under the direction of Sir Henry Irving. Irving, the greatest actor of the Victorian era, immediately recognized Blackwood's exceptional talent and began grooming him as his successor. Over the next 20 years, Blackwood would become one of the most celebrated classical actors in the English-speaking world, renowned particularly for his interpretations of Shakespeare's tragic heroes. But it was his portrayal of supernatural characters that truly set him apart from his contemporaries, whether playing Banquo's ghost in Macbeth, the spectre of Hamlet's father, or the supernatural figures in lesser-known Gothic dramas. Blackwood possessed an uncanny ability to convince audiences that they were witnessing genuine otherworldly manifestations rather than mere theatrical illusion. Critics struggled to describe the quality that made his ghostly performances so compelling, often resorting to words like ethereal, haunting, and genuinely supernatural. The 1915 production of Hamlet at the Palace Theatre was intended to be Blackwood's farewell performance. At 52, he had been diagnosed with advanced consumption and knew his time was limited. The disease had already begun to affect his breathing and stamina, but he was determined to perform one final time in the role that had defined his career. The ghost of Hamlet's father had been his signature role for over 2 decades, and he wanted to bid farewell to the stage by embodying this supernatural character one last time. Rehearsals for the production began in early October 1915, with Blackwood pushing himself despite his deteriorating health. His fellow actors were struck by the intensity he brought to the role, even more profound than in previous performances. During rehearsals, several cast members reported that Blackwood seemed to disappear entirely into the character, becoming so thoroughly transformed that they felt they were actually conversing with a spirit rather than an actor. The young actor playing Hamlet, Geoffrey Morrison, later wrote in his memoirs about the eerie quality of rehearsing with Blackwood. During Those final weeks, Morrison described how Blackwood would arrive at the theater looking pale and exhausted. But the moment he donned the ghost's costume and stepped onto the stage, he would transform into something that seemed barely human. His voice would take on an otherworldly resonance. His movements would become fluid and ethereal, and his eyes would take on a distant, haunted quality that made Morrison genuinely uncomfortable. The last rehearsal took place on October 22, 1915. That evening, Blackwood completed his final run-through of the ghost scenes, with what witnesses described as supernatural intensity. He seemed to put every remaining ounce of his strength into the performance, delivering the famous monologue about his murder with such visceral anguish that several cast members were moved to tears. When the rehearsal ended, Blackwood collapsed backstage and had to be helped to his dressing room. The next morning, his landlady found him dead in his bed, apparently having passed away peacefully in his sleep. The doctor who examined the body confirmed that consumption had finally claimed the great actor. There were no signs of struggle or distress. Blackwood had simply died as quietly and privately as he had lived, with only his well-worn copy of Hamlet's complete works on the bedside table as company. The funeral 3 days later was one of the largest theatrical funerals London had ever witnessed. The service at St. Paul's Church was packed with luminaries from every corner of the entertainment world. Sir Henry Irving delivered the eulogy, praising Blackwood as an actor whose soul was so attuned to the supernatural realm that he seemed to channel the very spirits he portrayed. The procession to Highgate Cemetery stretched for blocks, with hundreds of theatre people following the hearse through the London streets. The Palace Theatre management faced a crisis. The production was set to open in just 3 weeks, and finding a replacement actor capable of embodying the ghost with anything approaching Blackwood's legendary skill seemed impossible. After much deliberation, they decided to proceed with the production using veteran character actor William Hartwell in the role of the ghost. Hartwell was a capable performer, but everyone involved knew that the production would suffer from the absence of Blackwood's transcendent interpretation. Rehearsals resumed on November 1st, with Hartwell struggling to fill the enormous void left by Blackwood's death. The other actors found it difficult to adapt to Hartwell's more conventional approach to the role. After weeks of working with Blackwood's supernatural intensity, the young actor playing Hamlet was particularly affected, having developed his entire interpretation of the character around the specific energy that Blackwood brought to the ghost scenes. But as opening night approached, something strange began happening during rehearsals. Cast members reported sensing an unexplained presence in the theater, particularly around the areas where the ghost scenes were performed. Props would move without explanation. Lights would dim and brighten on their own. Most unsettling of all, several actors claimed to hear Blackwood's distinctive voice echoing through the empty theater during late-night rehearsals. The stage manager, Thomas Whitfield, kept detailed notes about these incidents in his production diary. His entries from the week before opening night describe a growing sense of unease among the cast and crew. Whitfield wrote about unexplained cold spots that would appear whenever the ghost scenes were rehearsed, and about the way Hartwell seemed increasingly uncomfortable in the role, as if he was competing with an unseen presence for ownership of the character. Opening night arrived on November 15, 1915. The theatre was packed with London's theatrical elite, all curious to see how the production would handle the absence of Blackwood's legendary interpretation of the ghost. The first act proceeded normally, with the cast delivering solid, if unremarkable, performances. But when the time came for the ghost's first appearance in Act 1, Scene 4, something extraordinary happened. Instead of Hartwell appearing in the ghost's costume, it was Edmund Blackwood who walked onto the stage. The entire theatre fell into stunned silence as the supposedly deceased actor, looking exactly as he had in life, began to deliver the ghost's lines with even more power and intensity than anyone had ever witnessed from him before. His voice carried to every corner of the theatre without any apparent effort. His movements were fluid and otherworldly. His presence was so commanding that the other actors on stage seemed to shrink into insignificance by comparison. The young actor playing Hamlet was so shocked by Blackwood's appearance that he nearly forgot his lines. Geoffrey Morrison later described the experience as the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of my theatrical career. According to Morrison, Blackwood didn't just deliver his lines, he seemed to inhabit them completely, as if the words were flowing from some deep well of supernatural anguish, rather than from memory of a script. The audience was equally transfixed. Many recognized Blackwood immediately, despite his supposedly being dead for 3 weeks. But rather than panic or confusion, the theater fell under a spell of rapt attention. Every person in the house seemed to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that transcended ordinary theatrical performance and moved into the realm of genuine supernatural manifestation. The ghost's great monologue, in Act 1, Scene 5, where he describes his murder and calls for revenge, was delivered with such visceral power that several audience members fainted. Blackwood seemed to channel not just the character of Hamlet's father, but the very essence of tormented spiritual unrest. His description of his suffering in purgatory was so vivid and anguished that it felt less like acting and more like testimony from someone who had actually experienced the supernatural realm he was describing. But perhaps most unsettling of all was the way Blackwood seemed to be addressing the audience directly during certain passages, as if he was trying to communicate something beyond the confines of the script. During the lines where the ghost speaks of being confined to fasts and fires and suffering foul crimes done in my days of nature, Blackwood's eyes would sweep across the theater with an intensity that made individual audience members feel as if he was speaking directly to them about secrets they thought no one else could know. The performance photographer, Marcus Thornfield, was positioned in the wings to capture the production for the theater's archives. When Blackwood made his entrance, Thornfield was so stunned that he almost forgot to take pictures, but his professional instincts took over, and he managed to photograph several key moments of the performance, including the iconic image of Blackwood center stage with his arms outstretched, delivering the ghost's final warnings to his son. The ghost's scenes ended and Blackwood exited the stage. He seemed to vanish entirely. Stagehands who tried to follow him into the wings found no trace of where he had gone. His dressing room, which had been kept as a memorial since his death, was empty and undisturbed. The costume he had worn during the performance was found neatly hung in the wardrobe department, though no one could explain how it had gotten there or who had hung it up. Hartwell, who had been preparing to perform the ghost role, was found sitting in a corner of the backstage area, in a state of complete bewilderment. When questioned, he claimed to have no memory of the evening's events. He had been getting into costume and preparing for his entrance, when suddenly everything went blank. The next thing he remembered was sitting in the corner, with the performance already over, and other actors congratulating him on a performance he couldn't remember giving. The rest of the production proceeded normally, but the energy in the theater had been fundamentally changed by Blackwood's supernatural appearance. The other actors performed with an intensity and emotional depth they had never achieved before, as if Blackwood's presence had elevated everyone's work to a higher level. The audience remained in stunned, reverent silence throughout the remainder of the play, still processing what they had witnessed during the ghost scenes. The reviews the next day were unlike anything in theatrical history. Critics struggled to find language adequate to describe what they had experienced. The Times theater critic wrote, "What occurred at the Palace Theater last night transcends the boundaries of mere performance and enters the realm of genuine supernatural manifestation, whether through some miraculous intervention or forces beyond our understanding." The late Edmund Blackwood delivered a performance that will forever change how we understand the relationship between life, death, and the power of artistic expression. But the most telling reviews came from fellow actors who had been in the audience. Sir Henry Irving, Blackwood's mentor and one of the greatest actors of the age, was visibly shaken after the performance. In a statement to the press, Irving said, "I have witnessed theatrical magic throughout my career. But what I saw tonight was not magic. It was something far more profound and disturbing." Edmund Blackwood was present on that stage, in ways that challenge everything I thought I knew about the nature of existence itself. The photograph that Thornfield took became the subject of intense scrutiny and debate. When developed, it clearly showed Blackwood in his ghost costume, standing center stage with perfect clarity and detail. There were no signs of double exposure or photographic manipulation. The image was sharp, well lit, and completely normal in every technical respect, except for one impossible detail. It showed a man who had been dead for 3 weeks delivering the performance of his career. The theater management found themselves in an unprecedented situation. They had a photograph proving that their deceased star actor had somehow returned to perform in their production, but they had no idea how to handle the implications. The story was already spreading through London's gossip networks, with wild rumors and speculation growing more elaborate by the hour. The decision was made to suppress the photograph and all evidence of what had occurred. The theater management, working with local authorities and church officials, developed a cover story claiming that Hartwell had given an unusually powerful performance that had confused some audience members into thinking they were seeing the deceased Blackwood. Witnesses were pressured to keep silent about what they had actually seen. and the photograph was locked away in the theater's private archives. But the cover-up was complicated by the fact that similar incidents had apparently occurred before. Research into the Palace Theatre's archives revealed references to at least 5 other cases over the previous 50 years where deceased actors had supposedly returned to perform in productions. Each incident had been quickly suppressed and covered up, but the written records remained buried in the theatre's files. The pattern was remarkably consistent. In each case, a beloved actor had died shortly before or during a production in which they had been performing a signature role. Within weeks of their death, the deceased actor would appear on stage to deliver their most famous scenes with unprecedented power and intensity. The performances would be witnessed by entire theaters full of people, but would be quickly suppressed by management and dismissed as mass hysteria or grief-induced hallucinations. The most significant earlier case had occurred in 1867, when the legendary tragedian William Macready appeared to perform King Lear 6 weeks after his death. Like Blackwood's appearance, Macready's posthumous performance was photographed, and the image clearly showed the dead actor delivering Lear's mad scenes with supernatural intensity. That photograph had also been suppressed and hidden away, but it remained in the theater's archives as proof that Blackwood's appearance was not an isolated incident. The investigation into these earlier cases revealed a disturbing pattern of systematic cover-ups involving not just theater management but also local government officials, church authorities, and members of the press. Each posthumous performance had generated enormous public interest and speculation, but that interest had been quickly quashed through a coordinated campaign of misinformation and intimidation. The reasons for these cover-ups became clear when investigators examined correspondence between theater owners and government officials from the period. The authorities were terrified that public knowledge of posthumous theatrical performances would undermine social order and religious authority. If people believed that the dead could return to perform on stage, it would challenge fundamental assumptions about death, the afterlife, and the nature of spiritual existence. Moreover, the theater world itself had powerful reasons to suppress evidence of supernatural performances. If audiences believed that only deceased actors could deliver truly transcendent performances, it would create impossible expectations for living performers and potentially destroy careers. The entire structure of professional theater depended on the assumption that great performances came from skill, training, and artistic talent, not from supernatural intervention. But the suppression efforts were complicated by the quality of the evidence. Unlike vague ghost sightings or ambiguous supernatural encounters, the posthumous theatrical performances were witnessed by hundreds of people simultaneously and often documented photographically. The witnesses included some of the most prominent and credible figures in London society, making it difficult to dismiss their testimony as hysteria or delusion. The photograph of Blackwood's 1915 performance was subjected to extensive analysis by experts in early photography. Every technical aspect of the image was examined for signs of manipulation or fraud. Multiple independent experts concluded that the photograph was completely authentic and had not been altered in any way. The image clearly showed Edmund Blackwood, in perfect detail and clarity, performing on the Palace Theatre stage 3 weeks after his death. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Blackwood's posthumous performance was not an isolated event but part of a pattern that continued for several more weeks after the November 15th appearance. According to eyewitness accounts that were never made public, Blackwood continued to appear sporadically during subsequent performances of the production. These later appearances were less dramatic than the opening night manifestation, but they were witnessed by cast members and theater staff who had been sworn to secrecy. The stage manager's production diary contains several entries describing these later appearances. Thomas Whitfield wrote about finding Blackwood in his old dressing room after performances, still wearing his ghost costume and apparently unaware that he was dead. According to Whitfield, Blackwood would engage in normal conversation about the production, offering notes on other actors' performances and discussing technical aspects of the staging, as if nothing unusual had occurred. These encounters were reportedly calm and natural, with Blackwood displaying none of the otherworldly intensity that characterized his stage appearances. He seemed to be exactly the same person he had been in life, with the same professional concerns and artistic dedication that had defined his career. The only unusual aspect was that he would gradually fade from view during these conversations, becoming increasingly translucent until he disappeared entirely. The production ran for 6 weeks, closing on December 31st, 1915. Blackwood's appearances became less frequent as the run progressed, and by the final week, he was no longer manifesting at all. The cast and crew reported that the theater felt empty and ordinary without his supernatural presence, as if some essential energy had departed along with his spirit. The young actor who had played Hamlet, Jeffrey Morrison, was profoundly affected by his experience working with Blackwood's spirit. In his later memoirs, Morrison described the encounter as the defining moment of his career, an experience that convinced him that the boundary between life and death was far more permeable than most people realized. Morrison went on to become a respected actor and director, but he never again experienced anything approaching the artistic intensity of those performances with Blackwood's ghost. The photograph remained locked away in the Palace Theatre archives for over a century, occasionally examined by researchers, but never made public. The theatre's official position was that the image showed William Hartwell giving an unusually convincing performance, despite clear evidence that Hartwell had been unconscious during the ghost scenes and had no memory of the evening's events. The conspiracy of silence was so effective that by the 1920s, most people involved had convinced themselves that nothing supernatural had actually occurred. The few who continued to insist they had witnessed Blackwood's posthumous performance were dismissed as delusional or attention-seeking. The photograph was reclassified as a routine production still, with Blackwood's identity conveniently forgotten by all official accounts. But the truth has a way of eventually surfacing, no matter how deeply it's been buried. In 2019, a digital archiving project at the Palace Theatre led to the rediscovery of Thornfield's photograph and the other suppressed documents related to posthumous theatrical performances. When modern enhancement technology was applied to the image, there could be no doubt about what it showed: Edmund Blackwood, clearly and unmistakably alive and performing on stage. 3 weeks after his own funeral, the implications of this rediscovery extend far beyond theatrical history. If consciousness can persist after death in such a specific and purposeful way, it challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of human existence. Blackwood's posthumous performance suggests that death might not be the absolute ending we've been taught to believe, but rather a transition to a different state of being that can, in certain circumstances, interact with the physical world. The theatrical context of these manifestations is particularly significant. All the documented cases involved actors returning to perform roles that had defined their careers, suggesting that artistic passion and professional dedication might be powerful enough to transcend death itself. This raises profound questions about the relationship between identity, purpose, and consciousness that neither science nor religion has been prepared to address. The systematic cover-up of these incidents reveals the extent to which established institutions will go to suppress evidence that challenges their authority. The church, the government, and the theater industry all had vested interests in maintaining the fiction that death was absolute and final. Acknowledging that the dead could return to perform would have undermined the theological, political, and artistic foundations upon which these institutions were built. The photograph of Edmund Blackwood stands as permanent evidence that our understanding of life, death, and human consciousness is fundamentally incomplete. His impossible presence on that London stage in 1915 proves that reality is far stranger and more complex than we have been allowed to believe. The fact that this evidence has been hidden for over a century suggests that there may be many other truths about the nature of existence that powerful interests prefer to keep secret. Edmund Blackwood's final performance was more than just a supernatural anomaly. It was a demonstration that the human spirit, when sufficiently devoted to its purpose, can transcend even death itself. His return to the Palace Theatre stage that November night in 1915 showed that some passions burn so brightly that not even the grave can extinguish them. And the photograph that captured that impossible moment serves as eternal proof that the boundary between life and death is far more fragile than we have ever been willing to admit. The chilling truth revealed in that 1915 theater photograph is that death may not be the ending we think it is. Edmund Blackwood's posthumous performance suggests that consciousness, identity, and purpose can persist beyond physical existence in ways that challenge everything we thought we knew about the nature of human life. His impossible return to the stage he loved stands as evidence that some truths are too powerful to remain hidden forever, no matter how desperately those in authority try to suppress them.